Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about Legacy. Yep, got a Legacy deck tech, and this time we're talking about Hogaak. Yeah, the menace of Modern has made, or crawled, or scavenged, or shambled his way to Legacy to an actual Eternal format, and he's been doing all sorts of interesting stuff here. So I think that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and get started about everyone's favorite legendary avatar. So this year's been pretty crazy. 2019's been sort of like a high water mark for Magic in some respects. Um, in other respects, not so much. Obviously, lots of growth for the game, lots of new cards, lots of really powerful cards. But in terms of bannings and balance and development and so forth, uh, it's been the worst it's been since Urza's block, really. Definitely, cards have came out pretty off the mark by a lot. Some are somewhat understandable, others not so much. And I don't really want to rehash that too much right now, but things have been pretty crazy, and Legacy, of course, is no different. Obviously, we had Ren and 6 banned, all sorts of really powerful cards like Arkham's Astrolabe, fixing mana bases, all sorts of cards for random decks like Scale Up for Infect, Slinging Lieutenant, and Munitions Expert for Goblins. All sorts of different and cool and new cards, and then also some cards that, not so cool and different and awesome. But yeah, we did get Hogaak. Obviously, was banned in Modern, but Legacy version of the Modern deck did eventually sort of get figured out in the last month or two, couple months. And it's another graveyard deck, of course. And you're probably thinking, well, why do I want to play Hogaak versus something like Dredge? So when you talk about explosive versus consistency, Dredge I would say is a little bit more explosive due to mostly Lion's Eye Diamond, and we're just of course talking about LED Dredge, not manaless Dredge. Um, LED Dredge has a little bit more explosive due to Lion's Eye Diamond and all the additional card drawers, things like Breakthrough. Resiliency, both are kind of resilient to Graveyard Hate in some respects. But Hogaak, they have a more resilient mana base. Just being able to actually play basic lands is a pretty big get. But the biggest difference, to my shock, actually, was the prices. And of course, this unfortunately is the nature of the beast. The world we live in, Legacy, of course, is hamstrung by the reserve list. And I thought the prices of these decks would be a lot closer, but Hogaak is about 3 times more expensive than Dredge. At least, around the time of this recording, which is like December. So Dredge is about 3,000, and or excuse me, Hogaak's about 3,000. Dredge is about 1,000, and most of the price of Dredge is just in the Lion's Eye diamonds, like 80% of it. So that if you're looking for a deck and you're like, well, shoot, which one should I play? If you already have the LEDs for from whatever reason, Dredge is a million times cheaper. But the decks do overlap a lot in strategy, resiliency, and so forth. Um, but really, one of the nice things about Hogaak is uh, sort of like Dredge, it has a very good game against blue decks, and it's pretty simple to play. There are some places where you can get eke out extra advantages, um, but for the most part, it's a pretty simple deck. And so here we go. This is what we're talking about. Um, so this is again a typical Hogaak deck. They're pretty much all mostly going to look like this. The only thing I would change is I don't think there's any reason to play 4 Underground Seas. I just cut that for a swamp. Um, 3 bios, 3 seas have worked out perfectly fine for me. I mean, like I guess if you get all of your underground seas wastelanded or something, I mean, okay, but it's typically you only need a sea around for a turn or two to get your Hedron Crab in play, and then maybe cast a Careful Study the next turn. you don't need a bunch of blue mana all the time. So I figure it's much better to have 2 basics for reasons I'll outline later. But this deck is pretty much what you'll see pretty much anywhere. Same thing with sideboard. Nothing too weird here. But we might as well go ahead and talk a bit about some notable cards. Okay, so what we got is Hedron Crab is really the biggest one. A lot of the modern decks weren't able to play it because they wanted to play Faithless Looting because they didn't really have Careful Study. Uh, but Hedron Crab is awesome. It definitely makes you have some pretty crazy draws. It really makes your deck go pretty nuts if you have like fetch lands and stuff. And so like random lands off the top, normally these would be bad, like really bad. But with Hedron Crab out, I mean, fetch lands, what? That's 6 cards milled. Pretty sweet. Plus the fetch land itself in the graveyard. Awesome. So Hedron Crab is very powerful here. It does a lot of things. Next up, we got Cabal Therapy. Cabal Therapy, of course, this card is, I mean, if you're not familiar with it, I mean, people have written thousands and thousands of words about how to use and cast Cabal Therapy, what to name, paying attention to what your opponent's doing, their body language, everything else. I mean, it's a very, like, it almost sort of takes you out of the game and you have to pay attention to the person and things that aren't exactly related to the game. Um, like their psychology, state of mind, what kind of person they are they playing aggressively? Are they playing conservatively? I mean, there's so much you can do with therapy, and one of the few places in the deck where you can get a lot of extra points, win percentage, just by playing Cabal Therapy well, um, knowing what to name, and if you can soul read people, I mean, that's 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 easily enough to win, if you just name correctly with therapy and then flash it back and get the rest of the cards that you want. That's absolutely brutal, absolutely brutal. And next up, we got Altar of Dementia. This thing is really awesome. I played with Altar Dementia in all sorts of random decks back in the day, like in the early 2000s and late 90s. It always seemed to find its way into janky combo decks as like a sacrifice outlet and did all sorts of janky things, but wow, that is not the case here. Altar of Dementia is absolutely nutty, leads to a lot of really early kills, like a lot of turn 3 wins. It's a sacrifice outlet, so it lets you dodge all sorts of exile removal and tuck like Terminus and things like that. It mills you, so it's an enabler, so it lets you mill all of your stuff, and then once you've milled yourself out, you can mill your opponent out. I mean, this thing does everything. It is sweet. It's from Tempest, which is obviously amazing because it's got that little storm cloud and reminds me of Shakespeare. Um, yeah, I mean, really, what can you go wrong? Well, I guess if you're the dude on the altar, that would go wrong. That would be bad. So, don't do that. All right. So this deck is pretty sweet, but it does have a weakness of the combo decks. You gotta watch out for those guys, especially stuff like Reanimator and Depths, which are not particularly weak versus discard, so that can be an issue. Um, After that, you've got there's 2 different versions basically. One with Hedron Crab Careful Study, other with like looting, Putrid Imp Anchor and stuff. Um, Again, nothing here that's too big of a difference. Obviously, the biggest thing is just being able to play Hedron Crab. The upside is so much bigger than Imp or Anger or Faithless Looting or something like that. Main deck and sideboard, pretty much any decks, like I said, are going to be about 95% the same, whether you're a bug or Jund. So there's not much different there. The deck is basically solved. There are a few things, though, you can change. I've seen some people play a couple copies of Once Upon a Time, anywhere from 1 to 3. Same thing with the random Dryad Arbor. But the deck has so much locked in that you have to make some hard cuts. So a lot of times, like cutting to Gravecrawler, Carrion Feeder, and stuff, doesn't always feel very good. Once Upon a Time is pretty nice, but the problem with that is it's bad late game. You only want to cast it once. You'd rather advance your board and do other things. Casting Once Upon a Time mid game feels pretty garbagey, honestly. Dryad Arbor is good, but if you want to be able to fetch it all the time, you need more green fetches, and green fetches, of course, can only get say like your dual lands, and you won't be able to get things like your basic swamps. Again, that can cause issues too. Not always good, and just drawing it in your opening hand is pretty bad. Um, but it is a nice card to be able to have a land to convoke out Hogaak, so kind of hit or miss. Um, but the sideboarding is also pretty easy. I mean, basically leyline where it's good, although don't really want to board in leyline when you have to, or board in leyline and something like Reverent Silence at the same time. If they're playing leyline against you, that can obviously cause issues. So you'd rather just go off with something like Force of Vigor or whatever, or Assassin's Trophy and whatnot. You'll a lot of times you'll board discard in against like Storm combo and stuff like that. Not 100% sure about the new TES decks that oftentimes play Echo of Aeons. They're a little bit more graveyard dependent, but I haven't played versus those decks yet, so time will tell whether the Leyline is worth it there. So yeah, maybe, I mean, I haven't heard anyone say anything like this, but there might, maybe if someone's thinking, well, this deck is so good in modern and it has like ridiculous like 80-20 matchups versus blue decks, like is this thing going to be banned? No, not really, because the deck has actual weaknesses, is a little inconsistent. It isn't like the best at sometimes recovering. If you like only have one enabler or something, it gets forced or bolted or something, that's an issue. So it can, sometimes get delvered. So even the decks you should beat, they can just beat you because they'll just have delver openings. They have the first turn delver when the waste and the days and then the force and so on and so on, and then you're just dead. So that's obviously an issue. Just those delver decks sometimes have everything. They have everything. And of course, like I said, the actual combo decks, which are faster, and any deck that interacts on a line that axis that you can't is an issue. Anything faster, of course, is an issue. So yeah. And if you open slow and they have like some piece of graveyard hate, that can be obviously very bad too. And would I take this to a large tournament? Yeah. Because, well, this isn't mentioned very often, but decks that are easy to play are definitely decks that are more attractive for me to take to large tournaments because there's less mental strain, mental fatigue. Your brain can only do so much all the time. You can't use it like 100%, so to speak, all the time because it just wears you out, right? So that's certainly not good. You always have people telling you, oh, be sure to rest and eat and drink enough water before a tournament and all that kind of stuff. And this is sort of the same sort of idea. You'll be in uh, more like top shape more of the time instead of just being like down and tired and just sort of exhausted mentally. So being easy is actually kind of an advantage. Um, Also, this deck has been improved quite a bit, although it came out around the same time. The London Mulligan, that is really, really good with this deck because there are just some hands that are just going to be a lot better than others, especially like, even just 5-card hands. If you just got like double Hedron Cramp, double Fetch Lander, and a Therapy or something, that's pretty awesome. Um, so yeah, you definitely want to, and the London Mulligan is also really good because it lets you get rid of, like, if you draw like a bridge or something, you can put the bridge back on the bottom of your library. Pretty sweet. And then of course you can shuffle with the fetch land to get rid of it, to get it back into the deck actually. So yeah, that's pretty sweet. And the deck is actually not super hard to play, but there is a lot of parts with like triggers, paying attention to triggers. Um, you know, should you play your land now to get your guy into play, and also so like landfall triggers obviously for Bloodghast, and then uh, Keytron Crab are important. So there's a lot of stuff to keep track of, and then just stacking them and knowing when to do things, and like, do I therapy myself before I play my uh, like your Stitcher supply or something like that. Just knowing when and what to do and what will give you the best outcome. Just being able to figure that kind of stuff out on the fly is pretty important. So yeah. But to play it, it's actually pretty simple. You're going to play Heathen Crab, and then after that, you're going to play a fetch land, and then after that, you're going to play a bunch more fetch lands. And you're going to have like approximately 1 trillion cards in your graveyard, and that's basically it. I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but Heathen Crab is your most important card. It's the one that gives you the best bang for your buck, turns all your stuff that will basically be dead, your fetch lands, into awesome things, which is cards in your graveyard. So multiple Heathen Crabs or just a Heathen Crab is very, very important. So this is something you definitely really want to open with it. And I would consider, depending on the hand, I would consider mulling a hand without a Heathen Crab. Depending on the matchup, the hand, post board, sideboard, yada yada yada, right? So Heathen Crab is the most important thing, and it's really great with all the fetch lands, and it's one of the reasons why the deck is so easy to play, because like even if you screw up, you still have a bunch of cards in your graveyard, and it's not a big deal. You can recover next turn. And basically, this is typically what is going to happen. So it's about a 60% chance, depending on whether you're on the play or the draw. Frank Carson had an article on Channel Fireball how often you get a turn 2 Hogaak, and it's about 60% of the time. So yeah, this is pretty good. So milling a bunch of cards, and then you convoke for 3 on turn 2, and then exiling 4 cards, and then you can obviously get your turn 2 Hogaak, which is pretty silly, and then you're already set up, and all you had to do was just play like a Heathen Crab and like a Carrion Feeder or a Gravecrawler or something from your hand, and yeah, you can just go crazy, just go crazy. So yeah, it's pretty insane like how explosive the deck is, and you almost have to see it to believe it. Although I think most people already know how explosive the deck is, and already have seen it, probably more than their fair share, more than they'd like, I'd imagine. But there's a couple different combos. Really, the main one is basically just Hogaak, double bridge from below, and alter Dementia. So if you have 2 bridges in your graveyard, a Hogaak um, in play, or one that you can cast, you will cast your Hogaak, and then sack it to your altar Dementia, milling 8 cards, getting 2 tokens from the bridge, exiling the 5 cards, and then tapping the 2 zombies you get, and then you repeat that loop over and over, and then the more bridges you get, obviously the more tokens you get, and all that good stuff. Once you build yourself enough to basically get all your bridges and stuff until you, well, don't have any cards left. I actually like to leave a couple cards in case something goes wrong, something I didn't expect, so I can actually just swing at my opponent for the win. You can mill yourself and then start milling your opponent. So doing the same thing, exiling stuff, Hogaak, sacking to altar, that kind of good stuff. And this can happen like on turn 3 a surprising number of times. It's kind of ridiculous how consistent this deck is, how it isn't really a combo deck. I mean, it doesn't really feel like it's not, you know, meant to like I have to combo out with Hogaak and Double Bridge and Alter like turn 3 every game. Otherwise, the deck would be bad probably. This is just like incidental. Like all of these cards are very very good on their own, and it's just one of those cases of like extremely high synergy, where it basically, well, it is a combo deck. So it's an aggro combo really. It's a pretty ridiculous. The deck doesn't have to do that, of course, but it when it does do it, it's pretty silly. Fortunately, most people have seen it enough, so they'll just concede, which saves you some time, which is pretty nice. And another combo, or I should say, again, just another case of a really good synergy, is Carrion Feeder and Gravecrawler. Carrion Feeder, being a nice zombie, lets you play Gravecrawler from the graveyard, and for every black mana you have, you can sack the Gravecrawler to the Carrion Feeder and keep getting bigger and bigger Carrion Feeders. Sacking and replaying the Gravecrawler twice will also re-trigger all of our good friends' Vengevine. And of course, if you have any Vengevines in play on that turn, you can sack them beforehand and then get even more counters on the Carrion Feeder. And when you play your second Grave Crawler spell for the turn, bam, you got all those guys back, you got Grave Crawlers back, you got a big old Carrion Feeder. It's awesome. So this is kind of nice too, and that's one of the reasons why having all these basic swamps is cool, because it, lets you at least do this twice, and twice is the magic number for triggering our Vengevines, making our Carrion Feeder a big boy, all that good stuff. So pretty sweet. But yeah, this deck is pretty easy, pretty fun, pretty cool. Honestly, it feels more like a Hedron Crab deck, and I'll definitely mull hands that don't really are just like average or meh, or only have one enabler to get something better. Again, like I said, depending on the context. But Hedron Crab is that good. It's very strong in this deck, and it's one of the reasons I would consider playing like a singleton once upon a time, like say cutting a land or a fetch land or something, to be able to have a better access to like turn one Hedron Crab. And then typically you're not going to be drawing too many additional cards, so you won't, you'll be more likely to, mill your once upon a time rather than having to draw it, which just feels like pretty bad. So yeah, this deck is pretty sweet, pretty easy. It is full of a lot of triggers and stuff, so be sure to come with your zombie tokens, your favorite zombie tokens. I, of course, like the Odyssey ones. But the M12 ones? The ones with the Viking zombies? Those ones are pretty cool too. So you want to keep track of your tokens, you want to keep track of your, sort of like Storm, you want to keep track of the number of spells you played. So if your second creature spell, you'll want to make sure you've got that down to trigger for your Vengevines and all that kind of stuff. Your landfall triggers, you want to go through your deck and make sure or your graveyard, make sure you got all your Bloodghast and all this stuff. How many bridges you have. One of the nice things is the slightly useful is like if you use the Future Sight bridge from below, they have a more art that stands out more. It looks like literally old unused art from Odyssey block, which I think actually was. And of course, the frame itself is different, so that can catch your eye and you'd be like, oh, okay, I have this many bridge from belows in my graveyard. That can be useful too. So there's all sorts of things you have to keep track of. So there is a lot of sort of math, kind of bookkeeping stuff going on, but typically you'll be able to just generate a huge amount of board, and it's really not that hard unless you're comboing off. And then typically if you are comboing off and people are like, okay, 2 bridges in the graveyard, 1 or 2 Hogaaks in play or in hand or something, and then altar, I mean, they they'll see the writing on the wall to just concede. So you typically won't have to do it, especially since this deck was so popular. Everyone knows how it works. They don't want to deal with that crap. And you don't want to deal with it either, because it's just more shuffling, more blah blah blah, right? So, yep, that's it. This deck is pretty sweet. I like it. It's one of my decks I like to play in Legacy when I don't want to play goblins and have to think really hard and think a lot. I can just start slamming Hedron Crabs. Freaking turn 1 Hedron Crab, turn 2 Hedron Crab, fetch land, mill. Play some big boys. I mean, it's just everything you ever could want. Just Hedron Crab City. That's the way to do it. So yeah, that's it, guys. That's all I got for today. I mean, this deck, I wish I had more for you, but that's pretty much it. Hogaak's a pretty simple deck. Just go turbo Hedron Crab, baby. That's the way to do it. Sideboarding's easy, playing it is for the most part pretty easy, but just be sure to keep track of all your triggers and your counters and your tokens and all that other kind of stuff. But other than that, it's like pretty simple. So yep. So that's it for today, guys. So thanks for stopping by and have a nice day.